Good morning from North Yorkshire. In this video I would like to show you how I made this ring clamp, a jeweller's ring clamp. I'll run through a few things that you're going to need. First thing is a suitable piece of timber. Now this one here I have is, I think it's about, well, it's exactly 40mm square. It's a nice piece of Lignum Vitae which I've got spare, so I'm going to make another one of these ring clamps with a slightly smaller nose for doing smaller work. This is a larger one. As you can see there, the ring's clamped in the end, and these winders, actually rescued those off a Electrolux lawnmower, believe it or not. I have a couple of those. I saved them. They've got a self-captivating nut inside, so the jaws open and close, as you can see, with a tiny spring in the centre there. You can just see it. So obviously you need a suitable spring. I've got a 10mm one here, which again I've salvaged from somewhere. I had two of them, which has come in handy. Another thing you're going to need is two small screws. In this case these are Torx setting 3mm, or the equivalent is almost identical, is a 5BA. That's the tap I'll be using today. 5BA tap, 2.5mm pilot drill. So I'll put all these bits and bobs away which I collect over the years. People threw out electronic equipment, and I literally have thousands of them in there. I never throw anything away again, and that's where I get all these from. And some go down to like 0.5mm out of the personal CD players and things like that that are defunct. So when next time you get some and it's defunct, don't throw it away. Strip it down and pinch all the screws. So that's basically all you need. A piece of wood. I'm using, in this instance, I'm using a coach bolt to go right through, and they have a castellation on one end, so when you come to tighten the end, it doesn't, the bolt doesn't spin. And I'll come to how you deal with that later. As you can see, that's smaller. So coach bolt, it's a 2-inch coach bolt, 6mm thread, which matches these lawnmower tightening handles up, what you get off the main handle. So that's basically what you need, and I'll run on to the next stage in a tick. So the next stage is get yourself a piece of 1.5" diameter brass tubing, which will become your little ring, the retaining ring for later. That one's 8mm wide, that's 10mm wide. I've made them slightly different, and they fit into a groove and fit into the timber to stop it from moving out. And the other thing you need is a suitable metal bar, and I'm using 8mm tool steel here, which fits in between and goes underneath the ring at that end and underneath the ring at that end, and that becomes your spacer. So there's two more things: 8mm rod, brass or steel, either, and then 10mm wide or 3/8 1.5" diameter brass tube. Next stage, I've accurately centered and center popped the wood on either end. That's important that you get those as accurate as possible for when you're cutting it in half later, because what you're going to do is you're going to leave a square on either end, about 1/2 inch square on either end, and then turn the center to the shape of the actual clamps themselves, and those squares later will guide when you cut this in half. I mean, you can turn it completely round, and if you're really good and got a really steady hand, to get it the wood in 2 halves, but it's just as easy to leave 2 squares on. And then when you come to push it through the band so it can't tilt, etc. So we're going to put this in between the sensors on the lathe and turn it into a cylinder, and I'll come back to you when I've done that. So here we are with the cylinder turned and with these squares left on either end. So the next thing you need to do is work out or measure what the internal diameter of that of your brass ring is. So when you come to slide it over this wood, it's got to fit over this wood. So you can actually measure it, and this here is 36mm diameter in between. So I'll turn that down to 36mm diameter, and when this fits about in this position, as you can see on the other one, as it fits there, you turn in 2 little grooves in there for that ring to sit into. So you're going to lose some of the diameter from the timber, and the ring's going to be bigger, which leaves this gap later. It's roughly about 8mm. So you've got to turn this down now to 36mm, and then you turn those 2 grooves in, so the top of the brass is flush with the top of the wood there, as you can see, top of the wood here. So that's the next thing. Turn that down to the internal diameter of the brass ring, then turn the 2 grooves into there so as it fits, which it will do. Well, you can put it in from the top, you see, but you know it's going to slide over because it's less the groove and less when you split it in half. So that's the next stage. There we are, turned down to the diameter of the inside of that ring. I've got the groove turned in 1 inch from the end, and I've got sitting flush from basically the thickness of that ring, which is about 1mm. I've got a 1mm deep groove, so when it's fitted, it fits flush. So I'll go on to the next stage in a couple of ticks. The next stage is to work out where you're going to have this the pin that goes through, the bolt that goes through. So I mean, it's not critical to where you want it, but it wants to be nearer to this end than this end, so you get more leverage, you get more nipping power basically if you do that. So what I'm going to do now is just mark that where I'm going to put it, which is about there, and put a ring completely round. Turn the lathe on. The next job now is to drill the hole through there. So I'll go and drill the hole through and be back in another couple of ticks. Before I drill it, what I've done, I've put it in the index on the chuck. I've drawn a line on either side to get it exactly in the centre. Then when I drill it, I'm going to use spur-toothed drill bits. I'm going to use the 13mm first, just so there's enough depth for that head to sit below the surface of the wood. And these are slightly bigger, these heads, they're about 15. I just turn those down to match the drill, and then after you've drilled the little socket in there, then drill through with a 6.5. It wants to be 0.5mm bigger so the bolt can move freely. So I'll go and do that job. I'll be back in a tick. There we have that stage complete. I've drilled a 13mm hole first with the spur tooth, and then a 6.5mm in the middle of that. And then I've turned down the head to fit into the recess hole. That's 13mm, that was the original size. So it'd be a good idea at this time now, there's these little castellations on the back. They need to be pulled into this timber, and they're 6mm, the whole 6.5. So line them up square. Place a stout washer on the other end. Best to do this stage now before you go any further, and just simply tighten that up at this end, and it'll pull that castellation into the timber there. So that's what it would be when it's finished. So you can see the top of the dome there is almost flush with the outer surface of the wood. So the next stage is to turn that to its final shape in the lathe and then cut it in half. Then we'll go on to the next stage from there. So here we are, turned down to the final shape, and I've cut through, not quite all the way through, I've left about 1/4 of an inch spigot on either end. So now we can place it into the bandsaw and cut it in half. One thing I'll just remind you of, when you're actually drilling this hole, make sure you mark it, the centre of that hole, so these flats are square. So when you come to drill it, then when you come to cut it, this square acts as your square, basically, your guide. So the next thing to do now is put this on the bandsaw and cut it in half, and I'll come back to you then. So here we are, completely cut in half, right down the middle. Next stage is to drill the holes, 2 little captive holes, for where the spring will fit into like a little pocket, and that's 10mm, and I'm going to place those halfway between the centre of that hole and the centre of where the brass ring would be. So basically just guess it roughly in the middle there. So I'll mark those 2 with a square across so that they're exactly in the same place. Like that. Then I'll use a 10mm spur bit and drill 2 little pockets, maybe 3 or 4mm deep, for that spring to fit in. So that's the next stage. So that's those 2 little pockets drilled for the spring to fit into on either side. And that'll give him my pressure to open and close the jaws, and the spring can't jump out because of those little pockets. So the next stage is to trim off these waste pieces and then dry fit the ring. So I'll come back in a tick. So the fitting of the brass ring next. So first thing to do, after you've cut off the waste and trued everything up, put the spring in, and place the clamp screw on just temporary so it can spring. Then push the ring over the top. It should be just a nice slide fit, so you can basically see what the finished thing is going to be. Now, to get that to fit correctly, you're going to have to squash here so this ring goes like an oval shape. So we'll do that, just do it by eye, and then we can adjust it later so it goes into a semi-oval shape, which will be when you come to fit it. So gently persuade it over the top and then turn it to the side, and then you'll get an idea of how big your gap's going to be. And ideally it wants to be big enough for this or any other kind of spacer to go in. So it needs a bit more squashing so that opens up, so this becomes a fairly tight fit. In fact, it goes in now. So that's basically the actual pin fitted. You see, it might need a bit of relief on the groove inside there, just to make it open up slightly more. So it's a juggling match. It's best to leave too little rather than too much when you come to this stage. And so we'll go on and adjust everything now, and till that jaw opens up to the same width as the spacer, or slightly wider.